We're in good shape. Glad to be here. Absolutely. Why don't we jump into it? So lots of transformation, especially in banking. We'd love to hear your point of view.
Okay, so the big change for financial services has been the regulatory framework, whether it's bank security, anti-money laundering, or Dodd-Frank. The industry's become the policeman in this market, and what we want to make sure is that we're not just adding more questions and more steps, but we're actually thinking about the process to make sure that these requirements that we're being forced to maintain work for the client and work for the employees and the bank.
Of course.
So if it's okay with you,
Yeah.
I'd like to start kind of with the process and what we do and what it looks like.
That'd be great.
So at Bank of the West, we start with the customer first. That's the focus of everything we try to accomplish. So a little generic, but that's a customer. So every person today already has a bank. In most cases, the process that we look at starts with sales and prospecting. So we think about who we want to do business with and how we get them on board. These are typically the annoying marketing email, phone call, flyer that you're going to be getting from us. I apologize, but it's key to the process we run. So once we've got a prospect to decide that they want to do business with us, we need to get into the client onboarding process. And this is known as Know Your Customer. And we're going to gather the data and the information we need to validate the customer is who they say they are. We're going to collect information such as your age, your address, your income, shoe size, favorite ice cream flavor, anything we could possibly ask. Very intrusive, yes. The real goal here is to make sure that we know who the customer is. The last thing we want to do is open an account in your name for somebody else. We're trying to limit the ability for fictitious people to open accounts, limit the ability for identity theft to occur. And so once this KYC process is completed, we start with product onboarding. So here we're trying to figure out, what we're trying to accomplish. So we use this step known as Know Your Account to figure out which projects and services the customer wants to have. So we want to know if you want a checking account, if you're looking to take out a mortgage, or if you've got some other product or service you're looking for. We're talking about what the customer wants, as well as how the customer wants to receive it. So are you going to go online, are you going to receive a paper statement, and so on and so forth. So the biggest challenge here is aligning the data that we're gathering in the client onboarding side with the product onboarding side. So we're collecting these typically in disparate data sets and disparate applications. And so the alignment of KYA with KYC is a very big challenge. And throughout this process, we're checking the data because we want to make sure we're taking the right risks. So not only are we making sure that you're not at risk, we're making sure that we're not at risk. This is so that we can better manage our risks as we're obligated to by our regulators. So, and the last step in this process is obviously servicing. This is where we load it onto the onboarding systems where you're going to see your account balances and so on and so forth. Throughout this four-step process, the clients are sharing with us lots of data and about who they are, what they're looking for, and what kind of product and service they need, and how they want to receive it.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that vision. So what are some of the big pain points that you're solving for in these workflows?
Okay. And that was the point of the transformation, right? We've added a lot of requirements. At this point in time, for a corporate legal entity, if you want to onboard them, you could ask up to 1,400 questions from a regulatory framework. So we may be slightly challenged. We have French banking law to attend to as well, but in principle, that's the point of the transformation, is to make sure that asking those questions and going through that process is working for the employee and the customer. And as we expect, the employee is the one driving much of this. So we have employees aligned to these different steps in the processes. Unfortunately, we may have multiple applications, so different employees using those different tools, as well as having employees aligned along different business lines. So we could be doing the same type of thing, onboarding in a retail bank and in a commercial bank on different applications. So it becomes very challenging to make sure that the client doesn't have to answer the same question multiple times, and that the employee doesn't have to enter the same data multiple points in time. So we may end up having a different application for a loan versus a deposit, and for a legal entity versus a retail person, and each of those apps shows up in each of the different steps.
So as you contemplated this transformation, what were some of the solutions you were thinking about?
Okay, so one of the bigger challenges we ran into is that we found that we could be doing this same process for every single product. So whether it's a checking account or a savings account or opening a mortgage or maybe even creating the loan for their small business, we had to run this process each time. And I stop at this slide quite often, and I probably shouldn't have done a slide build for a conversation like this, but it was to get here.
Right.
This is really what we looked like. And I think that that's a vision that everybody who has to run processes or run a business can understand, that just horrifies us when we try to think about how we're going to actually manage to make a customer experience work in that type of framework. But as you can see, if we can't consistently align, store, and normalize this data across these different platforms, it would become impossible to service a customer. So we chose, as our solution, to focus along the data axis first.
Yep.
We knew that we were going to rebuild the processes and the procedures. That was a change management piece with human beings, but our transformation on the technical side had to be to align the data, regardless of the source application, to make it into a rational structure. So to solve this problem, we moved to something that we called our party master. So the goal of that was really to sit down and say, I'm going to align and store my customer data in an organized, rational way as I gather it through the process. So we chose party because we don't actually just store our customers there. We also store all the beneficial owners of the various firms, the global organizational structure of our corporate legal entities, co-signers. We're actually looking at even trying to get in our vendors on there. So there's one day that I'm hoping that we don't have Appian listed just as a vendor, but also maybe as a customer. See?
Yep.
So the party master allows us to standardize that data in a consistent, high-quality way so that the client only has to give us the information one time. And a quick anecdote, when we first looked at that process for corporate legal entities, we were entering the company's zip code 18 times into 18 different systems, typically by at least 9 different people. So as we implemented the party master, it ensured that the customers only had to give us the information once, so hopefully we weren't asking them more times, that we were able to cross-sell and add new products in a rational way without asking the customer a bunch about themselves. We could start the process at that point instead of having to go from the beginning. And it allowed us to have the data and analytics to be able to run fraud checks, protect the customer, really look at the types of transactions they were doing to make sure that they weren't doing things or things weren't happening on their account that they probably shouldn't be doing. And lastly, it ensured us that our employees could be effective in servicing the customer, regardless of how the customer showed up to the bank. So, this makes the employee's job easier, makes it clear and efficient, which in the end should improve customer experience. And it was really about finding the customer, getting the employee the right application to be able to service the customer. And the last thing we wanted to do was build a single application to cover that whole spectrum. Right. We really believe that modular approach was going to be a solution that was going to be much more effective. And so to summarize the process we've been going down, we tried to select a platform or two for each step in the process, which work pretty much broadly and effectively across all of our businesses. There is specialization needed at times. And another quick anecdote, we are one of the largest lenders to religious institutions in the country. And it turns out that the best risk metric for whether a religious institution is going to stay in business and be able to service their debt is average adult weekly attendance. So average adult weekly attendance is not a typical metric that you store in a lot of data applications, so we had to actually build specificities in for where it was really needed. We've been in the business 35 years.
Yeah.
And in 35 years, we've had $25,000 worth of losses. So I am very big on butts and seats. So we went then forward and said, we connected and aligned our data to help the employees be efficient in providing customer service. And we visualized that data to help the employee do their job. And the key is that we're showing them the information they need Matt spoke about 360-degree view. Not a big fan.
Right.
I prefer really saying, a service employee needs the information to be able to service the account. They don't need to know that the salesperson called them 17 times and took them out to dinner and they have a dog and
Right.
3 kids.
Right,
So.
right. So I think this audience in particular would be very interested in hearing how long did that take and what were some of the challenges? And I can imagine there were many around data, regulatory, privacy, et cetera.
Yeah. So the commercial bank has been engaged in this for 5 years. I do want to give credit where credit is due. Wayne Anderson started this exercise in the personal finance side ahead of me, and I saw the success he had, especially using Appian to limit the number of apps.
Yep.
So I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, so to speak. But the big challenge we were facing is really the regulatory framework.
Okay.
We needed to make sure that the processes we were building that were effective for customers and employees met the regulatory requirements. And so again, it's that 1,400 question set. There's almost no good way to provide good customer service when you're asking somebody 1,400 questions.
Right.
So getting the framework in place so that we didn't run down a laundry list of every one of the 1,400, but
Right.
only asking when it was really relevant
Right.
to that specific customer was key. And then the other big piece is privacy. Obviously, we're a financial institution. The last thing we wanted to do was make all of the data visible to everybody in the organization all the time.
Sure.
It really was about being cognizant about the desires of the customer and the employee to only see what was relevant and not have to dig through everything all the time. And I think that's the real big challenge that we had to get past.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So we have a fairly good mix of industries represented in this room. What's your sense? Can other industries learn? Is banking ahead, or are we behind?
I would be hard pressed to find an industry that's behind us. I think
I would
financial
agree.
institutions, and it is, again, big challenges. 2008 was not exactly a fun time for the industry, and the changes that came out of there with Dodd-Frank and all the requirements. So we are looking at the rest of the world. I talked to my peers here from insurance and healthcare, which are just as heavily regulated as we are, and they seem to be miles ahead of us in terms of where they've taken kind of this process of transforming forward. So that's one of the big advantages of being last, is you get to learn from everybody else and maybe try not to make all the same mistakes that they may have made in their first shots at it. I wish that were true.
Right.
We still always end up with a version 1 that's not very good.
Right.
But it has been fascinating, especially, and I think that's the key for us, is we kind of follow and look at those other regulated industries so that we can see what's working for them and what's not working for them and learn from their mistakes.
So shifting gears a little bit towards enablers, what are some important enablers for your transformation, your vision of the future?
Yeah, I think, listening to Matt yesterday gave some really good insight around that question. He talked about the fact that Appian has created an industry or created a business that really didn't even exist before. So if we had tried some of these transformations 10 years ago, I'm not even sure that we would have been able to accomplish it, other than walking into a consulting firm and saying, can I please spend $40 million while you build me out a proprietary system on Microsoft Excel with an Access database in the back end. So that really wasn't the kind of solution I think anybody wanted to see. So Appian for us is a huge enabler. It is modular.
Okay.
I think one of the other pieces, and I've tried to show it up here, we try to think of this exercise as a mosaic, right? We're putting best of breed, good ideas into this. An example I've used in the past, it's a path, right?
Journey.
You've got this path from the street to the front door, and you need to get the customer to the front door, and you could walk in and level it out and pour concrete or put asphalt down. The way we've tried to envision it is saying, well, no, I'm going to put tiles in. And Appian, and the way it's built and the structure that it has, allows us to do that. And the beauty of it is if 2 years from now we don't like that blue tile anymore, we can chip out that blue tile, take that piece out and put a green tile in. And I didn't have to, jackhammer out the entire walkway and try to pour cement or make asphalt look like it hasn't been patched. And that's, I think the enablers is really the speed at which technology is moving ahead of us,
Yep.
and we can leverage on to make sure we don't have to pour these massive swaths of concrete anymore, which is how we got ourselves in the position we're in today.
Yeah, we love that. The visual of the tile is, I think it's really powerful. It really brings the idea of transformation and transformation with Appian to life, where you don't necessarily know all the steps in the path, and you're not locked into any individual direction. As you said, the tiles are modular, which is fantastic. So coming back to your diagram, which I love the simplicity and the power of it, and it all started with the customer. You know, at Bank of the West in particular is known for customer service. So how do you drive a transformation of this scale and not take your eye off of customer service?
Yeah, and that brings back a couple of different pieces, right? We also have to make sure the employee's engaged in part of the process. But,
Sure.
but that's, it has been the mantra of Bank of the West for, I'm going to say since '82, since BNP Paribas became our partner back then, that the customer is the center of everything you do.
Yep.
And so being able to sit down and say, I am going to make this process work better for the customer. If you can't say that about a process step, you better rationalize it around risk or regulatory requirement.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't fit into one of those two buckets, don't do it, because the customer's not getting any experience they need in the way that we want to be able to deliver customer service. And the other piece of the puzzle that we had to think about was really that exercise of making sure the right employee has the right information at the right time.
Right.
I think we've heard that from some of the other speakers, is getting an employee a bunch of information about the client that doesn't help them actually change the address or reset the password isn't really effective. So being really clear and certain about what the customer is trying to accomplish and why,
Right.
and then being able to have that infrastructure, that environment around them say, okay, well, this is the application you need to go do that.
Yep.
And the workflow in that application is going to facilitate that process so the customer's in, out, and able to do it themselves. Obviously, the long run goal is customer self-service.
Yep.
I have to admit, I step back sometimes in time and I wonder, you know, people used to wash your windows and fill your gas tank up and the whole bit. And now we take it for granted that we're going to do it ourselves, and they haven't charged me less. And I keep trying to figure out when it became okay for the customer to do all the work, and we still charge them. So, but we're going to move that direction as well. I think for us, it has more of an issue around data quality.
Okay.
We're certain that the customer is probably going to provide and put in that data in more effectively than we could.
Right.
Less translation error. You know, we still check it and validate it for accuracy because we don't want to open up fraudulent accounts, but we do want to allow the customer to do self-service as well.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So lots of transformation. I just happen to be aware that you've also replaced some of your aging legacy systems. And obviously that impacts the customer, but it also impacts the employee. You know, no one wants to be looking at those green screens. Can you share a little bit around the operational implications and impact of making those transitions?
Yeah, we started 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Re-engineering the process from the employee perspective as well. So the commercial bank at Bank of the West 5 years ago was 950 employees. It is today still 950 employees, but every single job description has been changed. Roles and responsibilities have been clarified and aligned. And the beauty of what we think has come out of this, and on top of, you know, the roles, responsibilities, job descriptions, the employee processes, what they're supposed to be doing, the technology has been replaced to allow them to do that work that they're now responsible for in an effective and a controlled way. And, you know, in that time period, the bank, or the commercial bank, has grown by about 50%. And we've taken revenue from about 630 million to about 780 million with exactly the same number of employees.
So significant growth in business metrics while keeping employee count relatively the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to say that the expenses haven't changed completely,
Sure.
because we have been able to reduce the middle. At the time when we started this process, the middle office was 140 people and our credit offices were 100.
Right.
You know, the middle office is now down to 100 and our credit officers are up to 140. So we've been able to move the work that is relatively straightforward to a smaller group of people to be more effective.
Yeah.
And they happen to be the cheaper people. So, and I think that that's one of the pieces of the puzzle that when people start into these transformations, the first thing the CFO is going to ask you, so what's the cost save?
Right.
And in our case, the answer really was, well, we're really not going to save costs.
Right.
We're just going to reapply them into probably more expensive people, but we'll be able to do more business because those expensive people are actually the ones that are driving the revenue of the organization, getting new clients on board. RMs are not cheap. Driving credit through the process, credit officers are not cheap.
Right.
But the workflow steps are now rationalized and organized so that we can drive that forward. So costs have gone up as we've moved to more expensive knowledge workers, but the number of employees has stayed the same and the growth has been significant.
But you've also done more. You've been able to accomplish more.
We're able to push more through the engine
Yeah.
than we have in the past. Now, a big part of the employee piece is, we have something at BNP Paribas that we call Global People Survey.
Sure.
So on an annual basis, we ask our employees what's going on, how's it going, what's happening. And through that process, through this transformation process of 5 years, we've seen some of the metrics steadily decline. Satisfaction with job, do you spend too much time in the office, kind of those metrics. But the metrics that we've seen increase dramatically, are you innovative? Do you feel like your firm is innovative? Do you feel like your firm is building a better environment for the customer? So we know we've been burning our employees, burning the candle at both ends with them through the transformation. Obviously, by not changing the number of employees, but changing everything, there's a lot of pressure to kind of do two things at the same time. But it is building a knowledge and awareness in the organization that we are actually looking forward to a place where the employee can do their job and be effective, the customer will be onboarded and happy, and we're providing services in a way that makes sense in a rationalized way. And they are not going to green screens. And I know you say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's not actually wrong. 5 years ago, we would service customers' accounts on a green screen.
Yep. So hooking on to the theme of innovation, I've recently read about your partnership with FinLabs. We'd love to hear more.
Okay, so I think the key piece of the FinLab is that we know we can't do everything, and we have no desire to do everything. So when we think about those modular bricks along that path, we're looking for components to be coming from our fintech partners. So FinLabs is an initiative that was kicked off by Jean-Marc Tor, who's the head of the commercial bank. And we sat down as a group with L'Atelier, which is a group out of BNP Paribas, about 4 years ago, and said, we want to bring in financial services companies, technology startups, and have them explain to us how they can do one of our tasks, one of our workflows, one of our processes better than we can. And what's the technology they would use? And we've done this now for 4 years where we're bringing in different firms. And as we do that forward, we then take out these processes we might have built in a way to solve our problem and are implementing much more effective, much more modern solutions to drive that specific task. And I mean, I think the ones in the financial services industry that we all think about is some of the risk metrics, right? I mean, some of the firms we look at use the number of Facebook likes you have, the interconnectivity that the founder has in LinkedIn, and so on and so forth, to make a credit decision for that company. So, we still look at things like, do you have revenue and an asset? But these other firms are bringing in some key components that we need to learn from.
Right.
And so by bringing in that engine that says, we're going to go look out into social media and say that firm might be at risk because we're seeing negative comments throughout that stream on a regular basis, you need to go look into their financials to see if there's something going on, if that negative social media is translating into a change in their business or not.
Sure.
So that project has been going on for a while. It's a fascinating piece. I think without the modular framework of the workflow, it would be almost impossible for us to bring these fintechs into the fold and be able to use them.
Yep.
And I think that that's the other piece. And from the last question, you talked about employee engagement. You want to excite somebody who's been a middle office person in a bank for 20 years. Bring in a technology firm that can say, hey, by the way, I know you're doing task X, but I can bring you data that will make that much richer, much more valuable. And you're able to really increase the value add of each of the steps of the process. And that by far and away has been what's driven the value of the FinLabs for us. I credit, so BNP Paribas does own L'Atelier, which is this incubator. Sure. There's an office in Paris, San Francisco, and Tokyo. And I applaud our parent for taking that thought process to say, we are not the end all be all, right? We know that there are people out there that are much smarter than we are. And if you can't leverage those, then we can't be successful in the long run.
That's fantastic. Well, Martin, we really appreciate your story, your willingness to share it, and we're glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you.